We're going to give ourselves a little bit more space here and just mention some more animation tips on this. We have this option over here, which is the multi-frame edit. When we enable that, we can come here and select several frames. Like let's select all of these, left click and drag across a whole bunch of them in fact, and we can see that actually we're able to see all those in the viewport. And now if I move into edit mode, we can actually press G or rotate or whatever we might like to do. That will update the position of those strokes on every single frame that we have selected. The object is currently called Grease Pencil or G Pencil, and instead now I'm going to call this Car Highlights just to keep things a little bit organized. And then just to demo something else, I'm going to shift right click over here and then control tab back into object mode, and then let's go shift A and add in another blank Grease Pencil object there. Click on the layers. I'm going to give this a new layer, which gives us a new keyframe. And then let's go over to the materials. Let's give this a temporary material just to show something. And the defaults is fine there. Control tab into draw mode. Let's see if we've got something coming up, which we have, but it's a little bit faint. So I'm just going to check where this is in object mode, which is right at the base. So let's move that up a little bit more so we're not going to sink our strokes into the ground, and then draw again. That's all good. And now let's just go to the next frame, shift I to insert a blank frame, and then draw again. But notice we can't see where the other frame was. To be able to see our onion skinning, we'll see that it's in a few places. We can turn it on and off in the material itself. We can also do that in the layer. We've got a global setting right here in our viewport overlays, which can be found here. Now everything should be working, but I think because we're in rendered mode, we're not going to see our onion skinning. So what we're going to need to do is just switch over to say solid, and we can definitely see our onion skinning now. The general settings for our onion skinning can be found down here. So we have colors for the before and after. So if we were to go to the next frame and then go shift I to insert a keyframe there, we could draw something else. And now if we go to the middle frame, we can see the two colors. We can also see these in material preview. And if we want to be able to see it in the render, I believe we might need to come down to display and then view in render. So with that on, we should be able to go back over to render, and now we can toggle them on and off in this particular area. So there's a few places to keep in mind to be able to view our onion skinning. This one probably being the main one, as it's the only one that might not be on by default. So with that, I'm going to go back into object mode and actually delete that object. 0 to jump into the camera, and then we're pretty much complete, just ready for a couple of general tweaks. So for example, in the fills, I'm going to come over to the materials here. I'm going to unlock the dome, the ship, and I think that's it actually. And for the dome here, I'm going to set this to be slightly more desaturated. And for the ship itself, let's make this slightly more desaturated, just to attempt to try and keep it in line with a bit more of what's going on in the scene. There's a lot of a wash across the scene, so it'd be pretty cool to just tie it in slightly better. Another way to tie things in a bit better on this object is to give it some rim fill. So we can come over to our effects and give this a rim, and I'm going to turn off the viewport overlays to make this a little bit easier to see. Over here we can change the rim color, so I'm going to make this quite bright and set this to add, and now we've got an offset X and Y to be able to play with this a little bit. So there's two things we can do with this. One is to emulate a little bit of underlighting when the beam comes on, but generally we can give one at the top. So if we take this so that it's more like this instead, we're getting more of that kind of feeling of the sky wrapping around this object a little bit. So let's take this, put that back to regular actually, or perhaps overlay. Depends whether we want to see our outlines, I suppose. Let's try add and push this further into the blue. Something like that I think is pretty cool. And then I'm just going to rename that to rim top, and then let's add another one, and we'll use this one for the bottom. So again, I'm going to make this quite blue and make this add. I'm going to blur this a lot more though this time. So maybe about 100 on each, maybe even more than that actually, something like that. Maybe give it an extra couple of samples. And now we'll animate this factor. When does it come on? Scroll back until we see it. So it's about there. So I'm going to right click, insert a keyframe, and go backwards a few frames. And then take this and put it all the way down to black. Since it's adding 0, that should be as if it's off. So again, let's right click, or actually I'll just press I to insert a keyframe. And now we should be able to see that come on like this. And then we'll play it forwards. And then from there, I think we'll press I to insert another keyframe. Maybe the next frame over, click on this, drop it down, press I. And now we've animated a little bit of a rim for the lower half as well. So if we take a look at with our overlays, we can see our blue light that we're using to light up the tractor beam, the grease pencil tractor beam, is kind of just floating in space. It probably makes a bit more sense to attach that to our UFO object. So let's see when it comes into screen, and that's where we want it. So while it's there, I'm going to left click and drag this point here onto the grease pencil. So I'm going to hold shift to make it be a child of that object. Now when the grease pencil UFO moves away, it should drag the light along with it. So that should wrap us up. This is what the render looks like at this point. Really, we're just scratching the surface of how large and expansive a project could get with all the parts of Blender working together. But hopefully, if this has been all new to you, that you now feel you've got enough knowledge to start experimenting with some ideas of your own. I highly encourage you to get on with bringing some of your creative ideas to life. After all, you never know when you might just get abducted by some kind of UFO.